Hey guys, Brian here, Starlite Pulp. Thanks so much for coming by. Here we are, episode I want to say 16, something like that. And tonight we have Manny Torres here. He's got a new book coming out this month, or very shortly anyway, with Outcast Press, and it is called Cabrones Perros. And he's going to talk to us a little bit tonight. So Manny, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks. Thanks for having me on here. This is fun. I enjoy this.
Absolutely. All right, so talk to me a little bit. So you have what you've referred to, but also what Outcast has referred to as a dog trilogy going on, and this is the newest release in that. So why don't you talk a little bit about Cabrones Perros, and then also how it ties into the rest of the trilogy.
Sure, sure. Cabrones is my newest book that's coming out. And for those who don't know, uh, the the title Cabrones Perros is kind of a take on the title Amores Perros, that fantastic film by Alejandro Inarritu. One of my favorite films of all time. It's inspired me time and time again. I steal from it all the time. And and then just out of a joke, I thought, hey, why don't I call my next book Cabrones Perros? And
Right.
I've been toying with the idea of Spanish titles because the characters are Hispanic, so I went with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a couple of years back, I released my first novel, or my first novel was published. It's called Dead Dogs. It came out through Moonshine Cove Publications out in I think North Carolina. That was a total fluke. You know, my friend Derek, who is a street musician,
Mm-hmm.
um, he and I had made a documentary together, and then we were gonna make a movie about some guys just driving around in the car, just talking, very much like a Jim Jarmusch type film.
Sure.
But then he died. My friend Derek died,
Oh.
but he told me these great stories, and I just wanted to honor him, and so just jokingly, I started to write the novel that was Dead Dogs, and then I had a story, and then then it kept going and kept going, and before I knew it, it was done. Um, and then it was a small book, so I thought I would include a previous, excuse me, a previous book I had written,
Mm-hmm.
which had dog in the title, which became Perras Malas, which translates to the bad bitches. If you
Mm-hmm.
read it, you don't understand. It's a story about revenge and lots of violence. Um, and then I had another book with dog in the title, so I thought, well, why don't I just pitch this to a publisher as an anthology? It's three novellas stuck together. But Dead Dogs came out as a novel by itself
Mm-hmm.
as
Okay.
well. It's people still, after 3 years, people are still buying it and reading it and liking it. They're telling me they enjoy it. They read it over and over. Um, and I got lucky with my next two books after that. Um, I had I'd met Sebastian from Outcast Press on Twitter,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and he'd offered book review. Like, hey, I'll send you a book for free if you read it and review it. So I love to read, and especially if it's a free book, and it saves me money. So
Sure.
I went ahead and I got a bunch of books from him, and I read them and read them, and somehow we got into a text conversation about books, and he didn't know that I had Dead Dogs, as I had written Dead Dogs.
Oh, okay.
So he liked it, and then he just in a roundabout way, he's like, "Hey, do you have anything else you would like to publish?" At the time, I was just excited to have my first book out there, and I thought, well, this will sell 500 copies, and then nothing else will ever come of my writing career, you know. Uh, and he liked. I sent him Perras Malas because that's a book that I was very much in love with for a long
Mm-hmm.
time. That book is the friend, like when you're just at your worst, at the bottom for whatever, whether you're addicted or you have heartbreak or whatever. That
Right.
book always came around and put its arm around me, and I believed in it. So I pitched it to him, and they published it, and it was a bestseller on Amazon, and it's very popular. And then they asked me if I had another book, and I sent them Cabrones Perros, and I was like, okay, well, there we go. We have a trilogy now. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Right. Awesome. Well, one thing I want to go over there, one thing that you touched on that I think is so interesting because I hear this stuff all the time. I talk to writers, I talk to publishers. I mean, we publish people. I'm a writer, so I mean, I kind of fingers and all kinds of little dishes out there, and a lot of writers who are trying to get books published think that there is some kind of like there's some kind of secret key, there's some kind of magic that needs to be unlocked. And honestly, I hear time and time again from people, and this is kind of how it happened for me, and it's kind of how it happened with you, it sounds like, is a lot of it is just, some of it is fortuitousness, some of it is just luck, right place, right time, that kind of thing, for sure. But then there's also this aspect of talk to people out there, meet people, get your work out there, and just like in anything else, business wise, it really is about who you know. And a lot of times things come from that. When my first novel, Trunk Full of Zeros, came out, Rothko Press put that out, and that was just Rob Cohen, who was a publisher who had done Caffeine. He and his wife had done Caffeine years and years before, which was a lit mag in LA, which was pretty big in the 90s. And I had done some readings and things like that. We had stayed in touch, and he contacted me, said, "Hey, we're starting a literary company. I know you've got a noir book. Let us take a look at it." It's like, oh, okay. It wasn't even me sending it out to, it was, and the same thing with you, where it was like, a guy found out, oh, you have a book out. Oh, okay.
Right.
So it's one of those things where my point in this is there's so many ways out there to get published. So if you're having a hard time out there as a writer, don't be, well, it's fine to be discouraged about it, but don't be too discouraged, because there are a lot of avenues. Just make contacts with people, talk to people, offer to do things for free, things like reviews, blurbs, things like that, and get your name out there. And things can happen. Manny and I here are examples of that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think Sebastian and I bonded on the movie Killing Them Softly, and I told him, well, that's a book by George Higgins, right? And then as a side, I was like, a few reviewers compared Dead Dogs to the George Higgins book, which was like huge for me. It was like, I mean, it makes me feel humble. I don't
sure
walk around strutting with it, but it was nice. So we bonded on that, and then when Perras Malas became what it did, then they extended another offer to me, and so hopefully, we'll continue our beautiful, business relationship. So, yeah.
All right, good.
Yeah.
And talk to me a little bit about, kind of give a synopsis, if you will, of Cabrones, Perros.
Man, well, first I have to say, when I moved to Atlanta almost 10 years ago, it was a turning point in my life on multiple levels. Up until that point, I had made documentaries, short documentaries. I had written a lot. Like, I've been writing since I was 14. And at 14, what I had written, I knew was not good enough.
Okay.
But I kept at it. Long story short, when I got to Atlanta, I had stopped I'd written some crime novels before. Back around mid 2000s, I wrote a trilogy, what I call the trilogy of Hitmen, which has yet to see the light of day, but eventually, because that was also a heavy drinking period for me. So those books are very, Perras Malas came out of that period.
Okay.
So those books are in that same vein of dark, violent, crazy stuff. So I get to Atlanta, I immediately start writing this very personal novel about this guy who shows up in a town, and I've never been good at expressing my own life in any way. But Cabrones Perros has a lot of personal things in it. So you've got, I mean, I am not, I studied martial arts, but I'm not a boxer like the character in the book. So you got a boxer. Well, he's an ex-boxer. I made him a boxer because I didn't want to give him a gun, but I wanted him to be able to kick somebody's ass. So
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
so he's just gotten out of jail. Um, he's got to go to his sister's wedding, and his boss, who's a local crime baron, if you will, just gives him an envelope and is like, "Hey, remember this guy you used to know when you lived in Odyssey, Florida?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Well, give him this envelope. He's gonna, take care of some business for me, and then go to your wedding, and then come back." And of course, it doesn't go like that at all.
Yeah. Of course.
And there's a cast of characters that show up, and they each have an agenda. You've got a group of guys coming from Tampa who want to get revenge on the group of Eastern Europeans that have taken over the city.
Hmm.
You've got this young black woman who's been in the criminal life and she wants to go legit, and she's there. And also you have one of the characters from Perras Malas. I don't want to spoil it too much, but
Yeah.
she shows up. She's dead set on revenge. So you've got all of these characters coming together, uh, meeting in this Florida town, fighting for space and just who's an ally, who's a friend. It's a big sprawling novel. Um, I compared it to like Elmore Leonard's Swag and
Okay.
Ick, Out of Sight.
Hmm.
It definitely borrows from those elements.
Okay.
I called it my salsa. Salsa as the music, salsa and reggae crime novel.
Oh.
Um, it's a little more lighthearted than the other ones. It's more like Dead Dogs.
Okay.
Uh, it's a comedy, I guess, but there's some stuff in it. So yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. We actually on Instagram today we just posted something about Elmore Leonard. He is to me just does not get the props, I guess, that I feel like he should. His influence, because it's not just there's the be cool and the out of sight and stuff like that, which the crime novels, which are cool, they're good, but he also wrote so many good westerns too. I mean, but before he became a crime writer, he wrote whole books full of short stories of westerns. 310 to Yuma, obviously, probably being the most famous, but and then Hombre too, that Paul Newman was in. But I mean, just he was able to make that jump, and then of course, towards the end of his life, you have the Raylan Givens character from Justified, and he's kind of a combination, right? He's kind of let's be honest, he's kind of a modern day cowboy
Yeah.
in a crime world, right? So he was able to kind of do that balance, and it's obviously you mentioned him as an influence for that, but he's somebody who was able to do. He was not only able to do it well, but he was able to do multiple things well, which is really hard to do.
For me, Elmore Leonard was um, the dialogue. The
Mm-hmm.
dialogue is so perfect and real. And if you've ever lived in Florida or even, I mean, Southern California, he gets it. He had a good ear for that and the scenarios. But my favorite thing about him is just in making his characters the bumbling idiots who never, it's like they plan this humongous heist, but it all falls through horribly. Like in Rum Punch, uh, the guys are about to they steal all these weapons and they're about to launch a war against the cops, but they don't know how to read the instructions on how to use the weapons. Things like that are very dear to me because just I don't care about the heist. I don't care about the cops. I just want the characters. I want to know
Mm-hmm.
why
Mm-hmm.
they're the idiots that they are. So
Right. Right. And by the way, going back to Cabrones Perros, when piece of advice to anybody out there just getting out of prison, when somebody gives you an envelope and says just drop this off somewhere on your way, don't do that.
right, yeah, yeah.
All right.
I enjoy that. Yeah, but that book is also an homage to Elmore Leonard, and I was
Excellent.
like, it was during the pandemic. Those 2 years staying indoors, I wrote 5 novels. After Dead Dogs, I wrote 5 novels just off the top, just boom, boom, boom. And that was one of them. And I enjoyed it so much that I almost couldn't stop writing it. And I certainly went back and read it many, many times. It's like probably my favorite to read of mine. So,
Well, that's awesome. You're making me feel pretty lazy, though. 5 books.
I know everybody tells me that. I don't know. I have the stories in my head. It's really the characters that talk to me in my head because they're based on people I knew.
Sure.
I grew up, when I was in high school in Florida, most of my friends were, this was in the 80s. So rap was still something that only, black kids listened to, or sometimes the Hispanic kids listened to. So I was with this crew I ran around with, except for my friend. I don't want to say his name because I don't know where he is, but he's the only white guy in the group. He's a ginger, tall, white guy. And he strutted around the school. This is 9th grade. He strutted around the school with a leather Bible case that had a gun in it, and it had crack in it, and they would sell that. So I grew up around that. I grew up from guys who imported stuff from South America. They were friends of my parents, So I was around all that, and it's like I never did any of that. I've never even shoplifted in my life, so I've committed no crime.
Mm-hmm.
I know it. I feel it. I know.
Yeah.
So they've been inspiring to me, certainly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, talk to me then about your upbringing a little bit, because originally from Brooklyn, yeah.
Yeah. I was born in Brooklyn, and then my father was born in Puerto Rico. My mom was Puerto Rican as well, but she was born in New York. I was born there. After about 2 years, we went to live on the island for about 5 years. I actually didn't speak English until I was 9 after I came back to New
Okay.
York. So I spent the early 80s in New York, in Brooklyn, in Gowanus. That was actually a really nice area. But the rest of New York kind of looked like, it did in Taxi Driver and The Warriors,
Yeah. Yeah.
Some parts were worse than others, but it's nowhere near as bad as they would think it would make you believe. I was actually very, very safe in that city, and it's still my favorite place in the world.
Is it?
I moved to Florida after that. I lived in Florida for 20 odd years. Well, actually, I moved to Florida, and then 10 years later, I moved back to New York, and I lived on Staten Island, which, depending on what street you live in on Staten Island, if you've got like retired mobsters living on your street, you can sleep with your doors and doors and windows unlocked.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Break into your house. You can walk safely in that neighborhood. So I appreciated that. I also grew up around the Wu-Tang guys when they were just coming out. So, that was my early 90s New York experience. Moved to Florida and then moved to Atlanta.
How was going from New York to Florida? How was that kind of culture change?
It was culture shock for sure. Sure.
Yeah.
There's a I don't want to talk shit about Florida, but there's a thing about Florida that's only in Florida. The idea, the myth of the Florida man is very real.
Yeah.
So, I had an uncle who was he was a college professor in Miami, and he's like, what, the people here, they're brutes. They're brutes. I don't understand them. I don't understand how they work, and I never figured it out either. That's why I wound up moving to Atlanta. I just got tired of just whatever it is that makes Florida. Florida, yeah. Like weird social mutation that's just gone terribly wrong.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I've only spent a little bit of time in Florida. I've been there 2 or 3 times, but it's all longest was ever a week. So, I haven't spent a lot of time out there, but that would be my experience with it as well. So,
it is. It's weird, especially coming from California. Are you originally from California?
Yeah, born and raised.
Yeah, there you go. I've never been to California, but I get it. I know a lot of Californians.
Mm-hmm.
So I can imagine how that can be a culture shock going down there for a few days.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so talk to me here about you've done a lot of things. Okay, so a lot of people who are just checking in right here are just going to know about the writing, which is great, and that's what we're here for. But you've also done documentaries. You've worked on music videos. You are a photographer. You have worked as a disc jockey, right? So you've obviously you've got a lot of artistic hats that you wear or have worn. But talk to me about you said you started writing when you were 14. How did you how did you develop into a multi-published writer at this point?
Um, an obstacle with language because I was bilingual.
Sure.
And, my mom, thank goodness, was bilingual, spoke both languages very well. She always encouraged perfect writing. So if I wrote something and it was missing a comma, if it was spoken, if it was written incorrectly, she always, you know, for me and my brother, she was always hard on us on that. So that was one thing. She always made sure we pronounced things correctly. I lost my Brooklyn accent when I was like 10, so I learned to pronounce everything the best way that I can. Um, I love language. I like the idea of communication and how language has evolved. When I could finally sit down and read and understand what I was reading, was probably early stuff like of Mice and Men. Although I read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest when I was about 13.
Okay.
Which was so far away from the Ray Bradbury or Stephen King that I was reading at the time.
Right.
Those were favorites of mine as a kid. But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was wild. It was like I've read that book so many times. It's just wild. So I began writing, I was a fan of a lot of pulp science fiction. I wouldn't read anything else but Ray Bradbury and
right.
Stephen King, Edgar Allan Poe, whatever book I could pick up for a dime and a quarter at the thrift store was great. Peter Benchley, actually,
Sure.
wrote Jaws and Beast. Mm-hmm. He's still one of my favorite writers ever. His endings are so quick and sharp. That's if you ever read any of my books and the ending just ends abruptly, it's because of him. I stole that from him. So I read those, and so obviously my first book was a science fiction alien invasion thing. And as I was rewriting, I learned that, okay, you write it, and I thought, okay, I wrote it, that's it. And then that's when I learned that you write it when you edit.
Yeah.
So, I typed it, and it still wasn't good enough, and I rewrote it, and I wrote it longhand. Of course, that book never went anywhere. It's in a box somewhere, but
right.
That was an exercise, and I understood it as an exercise. And I had ideas, and some things I knew I wasn't smart enough at that age to write them. So I didn't bother, or I attempted, and it just wasn't very good. I kept at it. I wrote papers. I wrote other people's. I never finished college, but I finished other people's papers for money. So I did that.
Okay.
The thing, and I'm sorry to professors and
right. Right.
And I think it was in my late teens, early 20s when I read Naked Lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Naked Lunch was
Girls, yeah.
just cracked the egg and ruined everything. But it taught me, because I think the way you read Naked Lunch, the way it's written, it feels like a first draft. It feels like the notes that you put down. And I appreciate that, because I always lie to myself whenever I write a book. I'm like, oh, that's it. The book is done. It's finished. Dead Dog started that way. It was very choppy, very beat novel, like a Kerouac book. And I'm like, no, you're going to have to create a plot for it, because I'm totally against plot and chronology. No, my books are told in different, nonlinear ways. So Naked Lunch taught me that.
Right.
And then a brief period after that, somehow in the same library where I checked it out from, I found Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. So that was it.
Yeah.
That was it. I was like, okay, I couldn't go, then I stumbled into the Elmore Leonard and the George Higgins, everybody else.
I'm such a Blood Meridian nerd that I have books that are, I literally have books that are critical essays and academic essays written on Blood Meridian. And I just read those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because and I've devoured the novel, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 times, twice with notes, and just It's insane. It
Well,
really
if you read well, if you read the first paragraph of Cabrones Perros,
is. Uh-huh.
yeah, that's me pretending to be Cormac McCarthy.
I actually got a little bit of that. I read that. Yeah, and
Yes,
I got a little bit of that.
in the beginning, yeah,
I
in
got
the
a touch of
beginning,
that. Definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
God created. I don't can't remember exactly what I wrote, but the beginning,
Yeah.
God created the beast, or after the beast, God created man. Well, however I did, but it's very much in a kind of a tongue-in-cheek nod to McCarthy.
Cormac.
Because
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the it's interesting to me because the when we think of Western writers, a lot of times we think of the Louis L'Amours and the Zane Greys and stuff like that, who are fine
yeah,
storytellers. And they sold a ton of books and they made a bunch of movies from those books. They're well known and they're iconic Western authors for sure. But when I write Westerns, I've written a few stories now, and I'm enjoying them. I'm actually right in the middle of one. And I find that like Blood Meridian, I actually have a lot of fun with the language because unlike say a L'Amour or Zane Grey, when you're in the West, if you put yourself there, right, in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, and you're in any of these territories, whether it's Oklahoma or Missouri or North Dakota or Arizona or whatever, um, there's so much nothing there. There really is that from a literary standpoint, you can kind of go crazy with it. You can kind of have fun with it because you might go days and days without ever speaking or seeing another person.
yeah.
And so from a literary standpoint, you can kind of have a lot of fun with that. And so that's one of the things I like so much about say a Blood Meridian and then certainly the Western trilogy McCarthy did too. But one thing you pointed out there that I want to point out to other writers too who are watching or listening is that when you do something the first time, so and you and I have both done this, I know it. When you read something, say by a Stephen King or by a Burroughs or by somebody who or McCarthy, somebody whose prose makes you stand up and go, wait a minute, how'd he do that?
Mm-hmm.
The first time you try that, it's usually really bad.
Yeah, yeah.
you usually sit there and go, oh,
Yeah,
I am not getting this right. But the whole point is you have to go through that process. You have to try it. It's the only way to sit there and reflect and go, okay, what am I doing right here? What am I doing wrong? How do I fix this? Do I just throw the whole thing out and try another one? But the point is that I think a lot of people think, it's that they want to be a writer or they think they are going to be a writer and they write a novel, like you said, and they think, oh, I'm done. Boom, book's done. And it's like, no, there's actually a lot more to it. The vast majority of writers that I've known, the first novel we ever wrote, it's in a box somewhere for a reason.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the ideas I implemented in that first novel I wrote, I think I had seen A Clockwork Orange, and that was like very like, and of course I devoured the book like 10 times. I read that book so often, but seeing the movie at a young age just like taught me that you could be weird and
Yeah.
satirical. I've always been a fan of Mad Magazine, so I think I'm a fan of satire as well. So I
Sure.
wrote in that vein because of that. And then through those exercises in that first novel, I could at least, sprinkle it into my later work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's
And
something from it. You will take something away from that first novel and take it
yeah,
into the other.
yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm talking about. It's so cool when you see something or read something like Clockwork Orange, seeing it the first time. Because I remember I was a teenager, first time I ever saw it, and it was shocking
Oh
to me.
yeah.
Like I liked it, but it was kind of like, eyes peeled back, like,
It is.
and it was a little bit like, reading certain things like you with Naked Lunch or, like a Blood Meridian, where you read it and you just sit there and go, wow,
Yeah.
and it's and having those experiences through art is so amazing to then be able to try to replicate yourself in some ways.
Yeah, and I mean, and you can, and then when you get really good at it, you can start to steal from it,
Oh
and
yeah.
no one really notices, or there's homages here and there, and that's important too. But yeah, no, you explained that well. That first time is so important, Like after I read Naked Lunch, I went and I found Burroughs' other book, the trilogy of the Red Knight, that Cities of the Red Knight and A Place of Dead Roads, which is a western that no one really knows about,
Hmm.
but pretty great too. And I've stolen everything I know from that. So um, yeah, I guess I still like to throw humor in my writing because it's
Oh yeah.
necessary. I write about some serious stuff, so I need it in there. But yeah, and you know what? Another writer too was Charles Bukowski,
Oh yeah.
who I think he unfortunately gets a bad rap as the drunk writer who writes about drunk people. It's like no, no, no. He writes about when you sit down and talk to someone for the first time, that impression you get of who that person is. That's what Charles Bukowski is, and I used him as a filter.
Hmm.
If I wrote something and I felt was too fake or too mainstream, I was like, well, how would Bukowski write this? And that was a big help for me as well. So
Okay.
I praise him every day. So
Okay. Yeah, I'm a big Bukowski fan, and I have just a ridiculous amount of books of his. And if I had a criticism of Bukowski, I love his stuff.
mhm.
It's that if I had a criticism, it'd be that in some ways he almost published too much.
Yeah,
Like because there are some things you read of his that are really wows, and
mhm.
then there's so many poems you read that are
Yeah,
eh.
right, right,
you know,
yeah,
and it's not that they're bad. It's not that. It's just that maybe they didn't all need to be published,
right.
but he did have such a unique voice
Yeah,
uh, for the time, and he has this, and I know this drives some people crazy in academia, but he has this standing in American literature that in my eyes is very well deserved. I mean, you
I
know,
mean, I would have rather read Bukowski in high school than
oh
what
yeah,
the a separate piece or whatever it was I had to read.
right,
You
right.
know,
John
yeah, no,
Knowles, yeah.
yeah. Oh, yes, yes. Okay. Um, yeah, no, and why not? It also it teaches you something about the most rudimentary way of writing. Is
Mhm.
just
Oh, totally.
yeah, and that's great.
Absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with that. He's so simple, so minimalist. It's perfect. So
He is minimalist. And the thing about it is, as you get better as a writer, well, actually, as you get better as an artist in anything, this applies to painting as well as anything else, is that minimalism is great, but you need to be really good in order for it to come across as both minimalist and profound. There's a lot of times when you don't have much to say that you think you're being minimalist, and that's not really being minimalist.
right now, it's just being basic. Yeah. I have a friend, Robert Constable Jr. He's a composer and professor in Florida, and he when I did the radio show, he was often a guest with us, and he talked about if you want to release a record of an hour of feedback from the guitar, you better know how to play that guitar before you do that.
Exactly.
And I paraphrase that, but he meant you better know what you're doing or what you're desecrating before you
Without question. Without
right.
question. And see, to me, that applies to everything else as well. Because I mean, that you had mentioned you like some great abstract painters,
Yep.
uh, Rothko, Pollock, and the like, and they're both great. But I have an issue, just as like we talked about before, as the son of an artist and somebody who grew up around so much art. I like a lot of abstracts. It's got nothing to do with that, but I do have issues with painters who are abstract painters who can't also draw figures.
Yeah.
Like, you need to be able to do that
Yeah.
first and then go off on it. It's like when McCarthy, will put together words, 2 to 3 words at a time. Like bone deep is all of a sudden bone deep, one word,
Right.
and you're sitting there going, that's not right, but he's allowed to do that.
Except, yeah, it's
and
true.
so I mean, it's
Master of the portmanteau.
yeah. But it's one of those things. It's like the idea of you. In order to break the rule, you have to know the rule, and you have to know the rule well.
Yeah.
And then make a conscious effort. You know what? I'm going to ignore that rule. But if you don't know the rule and you're breaking them, that's not great art. That's just being lazy. So
Yeah.
there's a fine line there.
Yeah, there was the poetry, but I always mention Patti Smith as being an influence on me. And
Okay.
her poetry in her books,
Mm-hmm.
I always loved the way she was sparse and used like run-on sentences.
Uh-huh.
I love that, you know. So for a while, when I was writing back in the early 2000s, I called it the run-on method. I'm just going to run the sentence on, you
Right.
know. And it's funny too because she wasn't. She was probably influenced a little bit by William Burroughs and a little bit by Lou Reed, people who were her friends, but she had her own complete style, and I
Sure.
loved it. So, but yeah, I mean, but she's read everybody and she knows every book, so she's allowed to deconstruct her work that way. I like that approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so here's something I asked almost everybody on here, but it's always I like to kind of get different answers from everybody on it. If there was one thing that you could recommend to a young artist or writer who is looking to be published, or could be musician or artist as well, but somebody who's looking to get published or get a gallery show or what have you, what kind of piece of advice would you offer for the young artist?
Well, ask them. I would ask them, what is your aim?
Okay.
Do you want, you know, this, or do you want this? On a on a personal note, it's always honesty and transparency. You
Okay.
know, but that's also hard too, especially with artists, because you can do your own thing and it can be considered folk art. And okay, that's great. You can be the great. It could be great or it could be cute. You know, maybe somebody's grandmother would like those earrings, and maybe that painting will look great over a toilet somewhere. Um, it's like, do you want to sell out? Do you want to go along with the group? I think that's the question I would pose.
Okay.
You know, what
No,
do
that's it. And
yeah,
that's a fair response because
like, how do you want to be remembered? I guess.
right,
Yeah.
right. And what's your goal as an artist? Because if your goal is to sell as many books as Joan Collins, then you're looking to do one type of thing, right? And so there's an avenue to get there. Whereas if you are looking to be less mainstream or create your own niche or it really does depend on what you're comfortable with. So no, that's a totally fair answer. So there's one thing I wanted to touch on, and this is for the dedication in Perras Malas, and it the dedication reads like this. I'm sure you're aware, but obviously we want to make the listeners. It says, dedication to my grandmother and all the women who have survived abusive men, and to the women who did not survive abusive men, to every woman who has survived toxic masculinity, misogyny, sexual assault, and domestic violence. These acts of vengeance are for you. So why don't you, I mean, obviously it has, that very clearly has its own meaning to people, but why don't you speak on why you included that?
Yeah, I'll be glad to, and it was there for that, so it could be discussed. Well, first off, my grandmother, whom I always talk about in every interview I do and every podcast I've done, um, a very powerful human being, passed away a couple of years ago. Um, she was the youngest of 8 children. She was a very dark woman, so the census in Puerto Rico considered her black.
Okay.
Um, she was blind, but partially blind from a young age. Told me multiple stories of how she had to protect herself, walked around with a stick to protect herself. I mean, I could do an entire podcast just on her, but I'll keep this short. But she was a tough lady. Um, she kept a glass bottle of milk, the way they used to deliver milk
Mm-hmm.
before, glass
Yep.
bottle. she used to keep an empty one in her china cabinet, and it had a crack down the middle. And she always reminded people, it was like, see that? That's the man who tried to get fresh with me, and I cracked that over his head. So she kept it on the shelf. She used to sleep with 3 machetes, like put into the trimming of her wall by her bed. So a very strong woman, very powerful. Like I say this with earnest. She had like almost supernatural powers. I think because of her Andean descent, she was really grounded with the earth.
Uh-huh.
Like I saw her take seeds, just random seeds. She was eating her fruit. She took the seeds and just threw them in the yard. And wherever they landed, there was food there when they sprouted. There was food we could eat from those seeds she threw out there. She was a healer. She could lay you down and touch you, and your sickness would be gone. And I speak this as truth. So she was a big, big inspiration for the main character of that book. The book deals with, it's a town. There's a town in North Florida or Georgia, wherever I placed it geographically, where there's a giant landfill, and bodies are brought there by criminals to be buried. It's a town where female sex workers are abused and murdered and just forgotten about. And this woman just one day visits the town, and she's looking for her sister, and her sister's gone missing. And her sister was involved with a local criminal family. So the woman does what, she tries to find her sister by killing everybody she can. And the characters there are very just horrible people, and I had to build them that way because they reflected a lot of people I knew growing up. I wanted to show that this was a female who was completely empowered and angry, and her enemies were men that did evil, horrible things, specifically to women.
Sure.
I have known women, fortunately not anyone related to me, but I have known women who have been physically abused. I've known women who've been murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And that book is an act of, it was a catharsis for me to write that, to express that. I wanted to just show that you don't have to be Chuck Norris to be a badass.
Yeah. My when I was young, my mom worked. She volunteered for years at a battered woman's shelter, and she would come home with some stories that were something.
Yeah. I touch on that too in Cabrones, Perros. And my mom would also take in battered women in our home. So I grew up around that, and I grew up, with a single mom, and my grandmother was really strong and tough, and I have aunts and cousins. I've had partners who are very strong, willed women and intelligent, and they can do things on their own. And I praise them. I respect them a whole lot. Women are the superior of the species. So
absolutely. Yeah.
So that book is praising them for that.
Yeah. My wife's the same way. She doesn't need me. She's
don't say that too loud.
She's fine without me. Yeah. Stronger than I am. So, all right. Well. All right. So we'll end it there. Hang out for me, with me for just a sec here. But so this is Manny Torres. He has written a few books now for Outcast. The most recent is Cabrones Perros, which is coming out shortly. Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as we get everything straightened out with the printer, it should be out late April, hopefully.
Okay. So
we'll be able to get the Kindle though soon. So
okay. So the ebook very soon, and then the print copy soon. Okay, and then he's also got Perras Malas before that, and then Dead Dogs, and he also has Father Was a Rat King. So pick some of those up if you're able. And Manny, thanks so much for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to talk books and writing. So yeah, thank you.
Of course.
In this topsy-turvy